Thank you. Hopefully, it is working. For all the years I've worked with Sylvia, every time I listen to her, I get very inspired. And I know that you must all also. It's also probably a little bit tough to follow her, but I'm going to do my best. What I'd like to focus on first is what Sylvia and I, one of our shared passions is photography. We both love the oceans, we both love diving. I happen to have a particular interest in underwater photography and also on how that affects conservation. And that came from my years of running a foundation. And I just wanted to point out how important it is to have good underwater pictures of human impacts as well as above water when we're trying to protect the marine environment. This was actually a trip I took to the Gulf when I worked on a book with Sylvia about 10 years ago. And this is one of the platforms. And it's rather unusual to be able to go underwater to take pictures anyway, but to go underneath a rig, what you find out is it's actually often an artificial reef. And in the Gulf of Mexico, you have thousands of these platforms, and surely there are a lot of these that exist. And I was in the Gulf a couple weeks ago, and one of the frustrations was trying to figure out how to get underwater to photograph the impacts of the oil spill. If you look at these photos, you can see through the struts, there's a lot of fish life, corals, and the coral just seems to go through the water column and attach itself at whatever depth it normally would. Now, when you have this oil suddenly emerging, we don't know yet what the effect is on it, but that would be one shot I would love to get. I think we're unfortunately going to have to wait to the Florida Keys to see effects on coral reefs. Above water, just like you saw this morning with Duncan and his expedition team, you can also take shots of a lot of the human impacts. That shrimper was doing shrimping 2 months ago, and now it's involved in the beach in the oil cleanup. So before we were actually looking at it as an issue of fisheries management, and now it's different. Obviously, as a photographer, you can take pictures above water as well, as Duncan has shown, and show what happens to these communities when some disaster like this occurs. The beaches were basically empty when we were down there. But they were cleaning them up pretty quickly in some areas, so it was hard for us to actually find oil on various beaches. I just kind of found this an interesting combination of the oil workers along with some tourists who were coming in. One thing that I do point out is that if you're an underwater photographer or even above water, this is a great way to personally add to helping do your part for the oil crisis, because images are very compelling and they can not only educate but also inspire the public and the government to take action on these various environmental issues. But one thing that I do point out is to be careful out there, because sometimes you're going to be taking pictures of people who don't want you to. These guys obviously didn't care. But the other problem with this particular assignment in the Gulf is having to go diving in a toxic environment. Anyway, there are two organizations out there right now working on conservation photography. One is the International League of Conservation Photographers, which is a group of professional photographers who have given their time and expertise to making images for conservation. The other is Marine Photobank. that is a website that was created a few years ago and has about 4,500 nonprofit users and in about 100 countries and maybe about 300 media outlets. And it's all, if you're a nonprofit, you can go on there for free and download the images that are put up. And I don't know what this says about the future of offshore oil drilling, but hopefully something. All right, this is, I was just needed a map to put something up there, but we're just looking at the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm going to shift over now to talk about what role the funding community has in the Gulf oil spill disaster. And I've been a funder for over 23 years. I've been president of a private foundation, and we've worked in coastal Alabama, Florida, and the Gulf, along with other marine issues. And it's what we often do is we collaborate with other foundations when we have an issue like this that is at this scale. The pictures that we see that we've been seeing in the media are really appalling, but we also think out farther, the next 10 to 20 years of what's going to happen and what are the issues going to be. And those are the things we tend to focus on when we're making grants. There are a number of foundations and individuals working on this right now, as you can imagine. Luckily, we've had a 5-year collaboration going on in the Gulf after Katrina, where we've worked with community organizers and environmental groups and local entities. So there is capacity on the ground. Today, we have 2 funder-established entities, one the Gulf Coast Fund and the Gulf Coast Restoration Network. Those 2 are combining to create the Gulf Future Fund at the moment, and this is to ensure the response and monitoring and implementation of the rebuilding and restoration efforts so we don't end up with another Valdez situation. Last week, about 82 funders met to discuss this issue, and there were a few things that came out of that. One is we all agreed that it isn't just the environment, it's going to be an environment and economic and social issue, especially in those poor areas where they're just barely making it by. 3 principles came out of it. Basically, that not every inch of the Gulf will be oiled, not every animal will die, but for those that live, we must have those to form a basis for the repopulation of the Gulf. Also, in monitoring, there's a $500 million research and monitoring fund, along with that $20 billion BP fund you've all heard about. And part of our job is to oversee that to make sure it's spent correctly over a 20-year time frame or further. A lot of people have very short time horizons, and one thing foundations can do is think out farther. The role of private philanthropy, frankly, is to enhance and to leverage government funding, and we do it in a lot of different ways with the groups that we use. We essentially enable others to go out and do work that they are trained and skilled at doing. Within these efforts, we have the Health and Environment Funders Network is working with the Gulf Coast Foundation on worker safety and toxicity. As you all know, BP has been very resistant to dealing with worker safety and making sure they have the right gear, and then threatening them if they complain about illnesses, et cetera. We also are concerned about the safety of seafood coming out of the Gulf, whether it's been tainted or not, and the mental health of the communities. I mean, there's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety down there, and as we've seen, the fisherman last week who shot himself, I think, is indicative of the type of stress that they're under. We're also looking at beefing up community training, and I think importantly, ensuring that the seafood-related industries come to understand and support this idea that, there's a very real reason not to go out, rush, catch every fish in sight before the restoration and rebuilding, because if we do, of course, then we're really out of luck, like occurred in New England. Also, there's a culture We need the support of enforcing the actually very good laws and regulations that exist today. Part of the problem is that they just aren't enforced correctly. Finally, there's a proposal to the White House on design of the research program that's ongoing. And what we do is we take a look as this group, this collaboration of foundations, at the transparency and credibility of the program. Otherwise, a lot of it is sort of putting everyone together to see who's on first. Because otherwise you end up with a lot of duplication, and our job is to make sure that is minimized. Well, things are getting worse. We all know that. But, let's ensure that we all work together on this and in a collaborative way and not worry about who's getting credit for what, so that there's more hope and less despair, and that we can recover from this to the best possible way. Thank you.